Yeah. And usually when there's a marshal up in front of me, I've got to get sound on. And I'm not a vocalist, so you'll have to bear with me. And if any of you have questions about airplane noise, this would be a very ideal forum. In fact, I was just contacted by them. Great opportunity. I should say also, it is always better to bring the turkey than to be the turkey. So hopefully I'll do all right. How many of you, before last November, had come to an event like this? Yeah, a handful. To those of you who have, I salute and honor you. To the rest of you, I salute and honor you too, because regardless of the outcome of this administration, and I'm sure we might mostly be like-minded on this, it is your participation that is extraordinary, unprecedented, and exactly what is required of a democracy during times like these. So I want to thank all of you for taking the time to share with me tonight. And I'll start with a little bit about my background, my biography, and explain to you why I'm doing this, and then most importantly, turn it over to all of you to ask questions, because I think that the first and most important responsibility of representation is to listen. And that's my obligation and great interest. So with that said, my life started in St. Paul. I was born in 1969, and my birth father, Artie Peffer, was killed in the Vietnam War when I was 6 months old. He was a captain, had gone to the University of Minnesota on an ROTC scholarship because he lacked the money to go to school, and served his country and was killed in Vietnam when I was 6 months old. My mother was 24, and just widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents in St. Paul. And so my life began. Not the charmed life that many imagine. But 2 years later, in a stroke of extraordinary good fortune, my mother remarried Eddie Phillips of the Phillips family, who adopted me. And I was brought into this extraordinary family of great blessings and of achievement, very high expectations, philanthropy, and also a little bit of celebrity, as some of you know. And I very much recognize that there's a very fine line that separates advantage from disadvantage. And when I consider, going to put a little more trouble on this, I even got a sound mixer. Is it better to talk like this? No. Okay. All right. I'm speaking of this very fine line between advantage and disadvantage, which is one of the foremost reasons that I am doing this today. It is the responsibility of people like me that have been blessed with good fortune to try to provide opportunity to as many people as humanly possible. And of my many blessings, being brought up in a family that valued that above all else is one of the foremost legs of my congressional stool, if you will. And I grew up in Edina. We moved to Edina in 1973. I went to Edina Highlands, not too far from here. I spent my days at Jerry's grocery store, causing problems whenever possible, and trading baseball cards. And then in 1980, I transferred to Blake by that time. My parents moved me over to Blake and Hopkins. And as some of you know, John Anderson, the Republican congressman from Illinois, came to our school, to our assembly, and spoke one day. And I was mesmerized. Here was a presidential candidate speaking to 6th or 7th graders at Blake, which, by the way, I think is one reason he lost the election. And I've learned in my candidacy, it's wonderful to talk to school children, but they don't vote. So John Anderson came to speak to us, and he was extraordinarily inspiring. He spoke of the need for independence in politics. He spoke of how money was corrupting politicians, and this is 1980. And it intrigued me. And we went to dinner that night, my great-grandparents and grandparents and I, my parents. And my grandmother, who was dear Abby, as some of you also know, turned to me and asked how my day was. And I said, Grandma, it was amazing. This guy came to speak to us who was running for president. Came to school. And she said, before you continue, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And I said, Grandma, I'm 11 years old. I don't know what those are. He said, you're a Democrat. So I was anointed a Democrat by dear Abby in 1980. Went home that night, looked up the definitions of the two, and that year watched the 1980 presidential returns and was fascinated. Down the road, I actually worked for Senator Patrick Leahy in D.C. on Capitol Hill, and got to see how Congress works. And this was a time when it worked better, a little bit better, and it inspired me. And I recognized at that very time, this is 30 years ago almost, that I wouldn't start my career in Washington, D.C., but if the opportunity presented itself and the time needed somebody like me, that I would stand up. And after November of last year, November 9th, I woke up like many of you, and I was shocked and a little bit dismayed. But I also believed, and I still do, that it is the responsibility of all Americans to afford an opportunity to a new president to lead. And if Hillary Clinton had won, I would have hoped that Trump voters would have supported her. The same way that when Trump won, I hoped that the rest of the country would at least give him a chance. I think it's fair to say that that hope was slightly misguided, and I'm troubled and concerned. And I started thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way, instead of complaining, to participate. And then I started assessing the record of Eric Paulson, who I truly believe is not an evil man by any stretch. I think he went to Washington as a moderate. But over the last 5 terms, and he's been serving as a politician for almost 30 years, but over 5 terms, he's migrated very, very significantly to the right. And while he is not Donald Trump, he certainly votes 100% of the time with the Trump agenda. But what troubles me more, and this is what's come to the heart of why I'm doing this, is that I believe our Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump. I think we've got an extraordinarily well-designed democratic system of governance, but our Constitution did not anticipate a Congress filled with so many members who lack courage. And the courage I'm talking about is the courage to stand up to somebody in your own party who is leading the country in a direction that, at least in my estimation, is not just misguided, but is really concerning. And his competency and character, I think, are reasonably in question. And there are too many who sit back and consider it to be other people's problems. And that is, to me, a dereliction of duty and the greatest failing of representation in a democracy, which is why I'm doing this. I will not promise you that I can affect great change by waving a magic wand. I can share with you my principles and values, tell you about my life experience, how I look to help people, and then do my very best. But most politicians fail on these promises because Congress is not designed to get things done easily. It's actually designed to make it really hard to get things done, which begs for people who are willing to talk and have conversations, celebrate ideas on both sides, the right and the left, and congregate and share in a way that gets things done. That's how it was designed to work. That's how it can work again. But it does take people who want to do that, and I am one of those. So that's why I'm doing this. I do so in a spirit of hope and optimism. These are strange and troubling times. I think most of you would agree. But, and this is the most important element of this, with getting out to the polls in 2018, with all the consternation, all the concern, all the hatred and all the misery right now, if people go out and vote in 2018 and express themselves, democracy will spring right back into action, as it always has in this country, and we will be just fine. But Congress is a direct reflection of every one of us. So when we complain and when we're disgusted, we really do have to look at ourselves and try to do better. I'd like to be that person for you in this district, and this district is a bellwether, because a Democrat has not been elected to it since 1958, as many of you probably know. And we are one of the last swing districts in the country. Voted for Barack Obama twice, Hillary Clinton by 10 points, by Amy Klobuchar by double digits as well. It's a thoughtful, educated, very engaged district, unlike many in this country. And as this district goes, I think so will the country. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you. There's a lot more to share, but I'd rather spend more time with answering your questions, engaging in some conversation. But most of all, I'm here to salute you. So heartfelt gratitude and Godspeed to you all. So with that said, we have a box of questions. Do you want me to draw them, or will you draw them? Thank you. Boy, we're going to really test Edina Highlands right here. And your handwriting. The question is, what would you do to help bring down the cost of attending college?
If you would, like, raise your hand,
Okay.
if that's your question.
Hey, double hand.
Yeah.
And you don't have to raise your. By the way, if you wanted to ask a question that's anonymous, I respect that too. What would I do to help bring down the cost of attending college? That's a very this is where the non-politician in me will be forthright. It is not something easy to do. The cost of college in public universities is directly driven by state policy. Some states it costs more to go to school, and some states less, as you all know. From a congressional perspective, I will tell you my principles and values when it comes to the cost of college. I I believe that education and healthcare in a country like ours, if not constitutional rights, should absolutely be a moral right, a moral choice. The difference between the two, of course, is one, the former is constitutional, the latter is an elective. It's a choice we make in a democracy. How we spend our resources, how we dedicate our time, what we believe to be our responsibility. I do believe it should be the responsibility of this country to afford education and health care to everybody. Now, paying for it is not easy. Bernie Sanders calls for education and health care for everybody. I respect that. But I also recognize that it has to be paid for. And do we have the resources in this country? Absolutely. Is it obvious? No. And it's going to take some really good thinking on both parties' parts to find ways to make it less expensive for those who are burdened with debt. And we should absolutely treat college debt the same way we do other individual debt, and in a much more thoughtful manner, if anything else, because when people are burdened with sometimes lifelong challenges because they simply wanted to do better, that to me is not in the best interest of this country. So the answer to your question is not an easy one. It is a state issue. Some states are doing a whole lot better than others to drive down the cost, at least maintaining moderate costs for education. But in the private system, that is not the prerogative of government. And this is where we as Democrats, those of you who are Democrats here, have to reconcile that with other perspectives. I believe in a country that affords a public option in education, as we have public schools, and then your private option. And the same as in universities. We should have very reasonably priced public higher education for everybody who is qualified and able, intellectually able, to attend. We should make that possible. Private universities, that in my estimation is really not the prerogative of government. And we have to combine both and be thoughtful. What are my priorities for environmental protection? Priorities. We're sitting outside on a beautiful evening, and for the very first time in my life in the last few years, I don't take it for granted anymore. As a kid, you wake up and you expect the next day to be full of sunshine and beauty, and we can't take it for granted. And my first priority, unfortunately, is to convince others that science is real, and this is not to be taken for granted. And that's a beginning. It shouldn't be the beginning, in my estimation. That should be a generally accepted truth. And frankly, yes, I do believe humans are part of the cause of global warming. I think that's an absolute. But regardless, anybody who denies the fact that things are changing and we're going to be subject to huge economic tolls, not to mention environmental tolls, is kidding themselves. Anybody that has traveled to Miami, Florida in recent years would notice that there's flooding in the streets all the time. There are a number of projects right now in Miami to raise the street level by over 6 feet. And these are kind of the unspoken stories, but it's happening. When I was last with Barack Obama a couple years ago and asked him what his biggest concern was, what kept him up at night, it wasn't North Korea, it wasn't Iran. He said it was the economic toll that global warming would take on this country, for which we were so terribly ill-prepared. And so when the question is, what is my first priority, it is to generate consensus that this is real, and we need to prepare. And we, as stewards of this entire world, with our American principles and ideals, should take the lead in that pursuit. Our exit from the Paris Climate Accord troubled me, not because I think that is the end-all be-all for addressing the environmental challenges that we face, but it's because the United States of America should take the leadership role, the principled role in addressing what is a significant issue, not just to us, but to the entire world. So there's a lot we can do. Minnesota's, I think, better positioned than many states with our own legislation that Tim Pawlenty signed 10 years ago. But with that said, it starts with consensus building, recognition of the problem, and America does spring into action. Once we're convinced, and we have the conviction to get things done, we will. And I do believe this is an issue where people like me can inspire that. Oh, here's a long one. We can't expect our representatives to be experts in healthcare economics, but we need them to be ready to vote on this important issue. How will you educate yourself and prepare to to vote on any healthcare issues so that you can make an informed decision. Abby, medical student. Hey, thanks, Abby. Anybody who says they completely understand American healthcare is probably misleading you. That's a starting point. But you asked the question, what would I do to prepare? I've spent a lot of time preparing. I served on the board of Allina Health System for a number of years. I chaired the board of Allina Health System for 2 years. I did so to serve the community, and I did so to learn. As many of you recognize and understand, the legislation that's been pending in Congress and was recently the ACA and other bits of legislation that were not passed only deal with the insurance coverage of Americans. They do not, none of the legislation that I've read that has been public deals with the provision of health care. And a system is not a system when you're only talking about coverage. This is a holistic issue. We have to talk about it in those terms. And I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that we have a complete misalignment of incentives. When you are, first of all, we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. When you get sick, there's a system there that if you're lucky enough to have insurance and you know how to navigate it, you can get coverage. But we do not invest nearly enough, and this is my starting point, we do not invest nearly enough in providing incentives to both people and to the institutions that care for people to keep them healthy. In a capitated system such as Kaiser Permanente in California, the capitated model pays the system a fixed amount per patient in the system, which provides the institution an incentive to keep people healthy so they do not have to pay for expensive care. You know, that notion is not used in most health systems, which are only compensated when people get sick and they order a procedure or a prescription. So one is the misalignment of incentives. We have to invest in prevention and provide rewards for it. Second is pharmaceutical pricing. Our prescription drug pricing is not just high, it is exorbitant, and every single one of us here is paying for low drug pricing in the rest of the world. Our friends in every developed country in the world that have single buyer health prescription systems pay pennies on the dollar based on what we pay. I think it is an imperative, and this is a distinction, this is not single payer health care, this is single negotiator prescription drugs. We should be paying competitive prices with the rest of the world. That's another way I've prepared for this. This is nonsensical, it is wrong, it is easily addressed, and it is something that should be nonpartisan. But as long as pharmaceutical companies invest hundreds of millions of dollars and billions over the years in financing the campaigns of people that represent all of us in D.C., we will continue to get votes that prohibit and don't allow for the change that we need. That is another way I've prepared for the healthcare issues. When it comes to insurance, I believe that we should have universal coverage of every American, regardless of age, income, or condition, period. Okay? That is not to say single payer is the only answer. I'm sharing with you my principles and values. We should have universal coverage for everybody. There are a lot of ways to make that happen. There's a lot of ways we can combine Republican principles with Democratic principles and get it done. But it takes people who are not in the pockets of the systems that are in place right now to do that work. I intend to be one of those people, which is why I don't take PAC money, don't take lobbyist money, don't take special money. Those are a few ways to prepare. I do believe in the preservation of the private system. I believe that competition, when it comes to the provision of care, is the only thing that guarantees the highest quality at the lowest cost, which is a very Republican notion, the preservation of the private system. It is imperative. So when you ask me how I look at healthcare, I look at it very much like I do our public elementary education system. We provide public education to every single child in this country, regardless of where they come from. Not as good in many situations as we need, but we provide it. Nobody argues with it. I believe we should look at healthcare the exact same way. There should be that option for all those who need it, and also allow for private care, private insurance for all those who want that too. There's a way to make it work. It just takes thoughtful people, and that's how I'm looking at it. Next question: if elected to represent CD3, what are the top 3 issues you plan to fight and work on, for your constituents as soon as you get to D.C.? My first priority, so first of all, there's a lot of fight. There's a lot of terminology. I'm going to fight for this. I'm going to fight for that. I am relentless, and I'm aggressive. I do not give up. But I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to fight, because we need fewer fighters in Congress, and we need more thoughtfulness. We need more ideas, and we need to redesign systems to make them more efficient. So I'm going to just use that terminology for a second. The three most important issues to me are as follows. First and foremost, money in politics is, in my estimation, the single greatest corrupter of our system. It is largely responsible for why things are not getting done in Washington. And until we acknowledge it and address it, just like climate change, until we acknowledge it, nothing's going to change. None of the issues that are of great significance to all of you will be touched until there are people in Washington who are not in the pockets of very moneyed established interests. I've seen this from the inside. I've seen it from the outside. It needs to change. How to do so? We limit the amount of money that you can give to candidates like me as an individual. Right now it's $5,400 per person. How many of you could write a $5,400 check to me tonight? Oh, I should hit the road. But Eric Paulson has to spend hours a day, I imagine, dialing for dollars. I have to spend hours a day doing the same thing. And where do you dial for the dollars? For people who can give you $5,400. Or, in his case, because he takes PAC money and lobbyist money and all the special interest money, with all those organizations. Because that is how the game works. That's how the system works. If we limited the amount that everybody could give, it would force people like me and like Eric Paulson and the other 534 members of Congress to go out in the outlying areas, visit with people rich and poor and black and white and of all religions and backgrounds and professions and situations, instead of just calling on those with money. And if you ask me what the biggest problem is, it is just that, yeah?
Isn't there an act, Congress has to act on that to lower the interest, because the Supreme Court is the one that said...
Citizens United.
Yeah, that you
Yes.
can do this.
I'd like to
so
see...
We have to have a change.
Yeah, the question is about Citizens United. I'm not going to argue that that was a wrong decision based on the constitutionality was wrong, but it absolutely is wrong for this country, and is absolutely contrary to what our foremothers and forefathers, our founding mothers and fathers, wanted for this country. It has to change. And I believe that's the starting point. If nothing else, I believe if I can affect a little bit of change in that area, a lot of what we're concerned about, a lot of what isn't working will change, and this country will be a whole lot better off if I can affect that. Number two, healthcare. Some are saying, in fact, a lot of Democrats are saying, hallelujah, we stopped it, we're done. And no, that's not. This is just the beginning. The ACA is not perfect. It absolutely needs to be addressed. There are thoughtful ways to do so. The Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress right now, 43 Republicans and Democrats, have issued some very thoughtful solutions to improve the ACA so it works better. I believe that can be done. But as I said earlier, we also have to address the provision of care and tie it together and truly create a system. For the most extraordinary country in the world, the United States of America, one that dedicates 18% of its entire economy to healthcare, which is double that of every developed country in the world for the most part. And our outcomes, my friends, are mid-pack. If you got a lot of money, your outcomes are really, really good in this country. If you don't, it's a crapshoot, and your outcomes are in the middle. And there are plenty of countries that would shock you that have better healthcare outcomes than our country, that spend pennies on the dollar. So that has to change. The last is education. And I say this because it is a priority of mine. But I've done enough work in the field of education in both the public system, the charter system, and the private system, and also higher education as a board member at St. John's, to recognize that I do believe that education is best solved on local levels. Nobody better understands what local students need than the local parents and communities. I believe the federal government should play a role in it, but I also believe that it is a significant bureaucracy that prevents change. It is the reason that we have charter schools, in my estimation, is because the public schools, in many cases, have simply not served the kids that they need to serve in the way they deserve to be served. So the question of what role should the federal government play in education is one that's on my mind. I'd like to see more resources dedicated on local levels, at the state level, to improve education. The 3rd District is very blessed. I'll be the first to say it. Not every school is the best in the state, but we have some of the best public schools in the entire state of Minnesota. You go a couple miles over the border to North Minneapolis, and it's an entirely different world. So I will say this, when you're elected to Congress and you're one of 535 voices, yes, it is your task and responsibility to represent those that live in your district, but it is also a responsibility to represent the voiceless kids in communities that don't have that representation, to also recognize their needs and do well by them. So those are the three priorities. I've got a lot more, and if we have some more time, I'll share them with you as well. Next question, what are the necessary actions to address the national debt? I'm a Democrat who believes our national debt is not just significant, but is reaching a level that is going to be extraordinarily detrimental to future generations of this country. And it is, to me, I say time and time again, I am responsible, I'm inclusive, and I'm independent. And when I talk about responsibility, I'm really talking about fiscal responsibility. We have a lot of challenges in our country. We all acknowledge that, we all agree, and in fact, many of us would probably agree on what the prescriptions would be for those challenges. But there has got to be an understanding of the fact that our national debt is something that on a personal level in your own household, you would never tolerate. Never tolerate. And that's going to take some really, really thoughtful consideration as we move forward. Right now we live in a very low interest market, and money is cheap. If there's a spike in interest rates and the debt service on our national debt skyrockets, as it probably will, we were talking about monetary policy, right? Yeah. It's going to come at some point. That's when it's going to get real tough. We're very lucky right now because the cost of our debt is in relative terms quite low. There is no easy solution. I'm not going to tell you I know how to solve it. In fact, there's not a Republican or a Democrat in Washington, D.C. right now who has in my estimation, a responsible way to really address that debt. It has to be looked at as a continuum over generations, and we have to be intentional and slow. As anybody who has significant credit card debt, you don't do it overnight. You do it gradually and thoughtfully and with a plan. And that takes thoughtful Democrats agreeing with Republicans who are, in my estimation, pointing this out more regularly, and I think appropriately, that we have a problem. And I think there's a more likely economic problem in that respect than there is an international crisis relative to military conflict. And that's something we should recognize and address. I'm a business person, so you can imagine I have some experience managing debt. Having debt is not a bad thing at all. In fact, it's encouraged in most circumstances, and certainly for the United States of America. But having it a smaller portion of our economy is in our best interest. There are ways to do it, but it has to be intentional on both sides. If I don't live in your district, how can I help? Oh, that was you, Melinda. Thank you. Well, conversations. You can support my campaign by making an investment in me. I don't ask for donations. I ask for investments, because when you invest something, you expect a return. In a political campaign, you will not get a return on your money, but you will get a return on your principles. And so I do. Your investment would be very meaningful to me. I'm not taking money from lobbyists. I'm not taking money from PACs. I'm not self-financing my campaign entirely, because I think that is also not fair in a democracy. I don't think it should be just the domain of the fortunate few, and I'm fortunate. So that's one way. But conversations are, in my estimation, the most integral, important, and valued contribution you can make to a campaign like mine, or frankly, to the other DFLers who are seeking the nomination and the endorsement. This campaign is all about conversations. Some of you may have seen my 1960 International Harvester Metro van, which I would have driven. I thought it was going to rain tonight, so I didn't. But it's all about having conversations. I'm doing that throughout the district. I've had the most extraordinary conversations with passionate supporters of Donald Trump, with very conservative Republicans, and very left-leaning liberal Democrats. And each one of them, when people share a cup of coffee with me, and we have a thoughtful conversation, it is an extraordinary treasure and the most joyful element of what I'm doing. So when you, in turn, have conversations with other people, about about what you think of me, or about what I shared with you tonight, or about what you think is important. That is the best investment you can make, not just in my campaign, but in democracy. So conversations, your investment, and your advocacy would all be extraordinarily helpful and gratifying, no matter which candidate you choose to support. Oh, this is a great one. What is your position regarding the restoration of voting rights for people with felonies, RE, people on paper, probation and parole, and people currently incarcerated? So, this is a sensitive subject, and there's an entire criminal justice question in this one as well. I believe in redemption. I believe in this American principle of you pay your debt to society, you redeem yourself, and if you redeem yourself in a way, a thoughtful way that is demonstrated, and you're no longer a threat to the community, that voting rights in those circumstances should be restored. I am for more engagement, not disenfranchisement. Even if you deserve to be disenfranchised for a period of time, I believe if you pay your dues and you come out, you should be able to vote. But I also believe it's incumbent on us as a society to dedicate, we call it the correction system, but we don't really correct anything. We incarcerate for the most part. And I think we also can look to best practices from around the world. There are some systems that invest much more heavily in truly rehabilitating people and truly correcting and affording opportunity and education. I think those who make a choice to improve themselves while in prison should be afforded rights to vote afterwards. But I think it's the responsibility of all of ours to call for that as well. And I will also say that there's an irony in that if you commit a felony, you're provided health care in prison. That's not true of people who are law-abiding, productive citizens who are simply on the economic scale in which they couldn't, before the ACA, afford health care. We have some extraordinary ironies that, again, have to be simply acknowledged, and that happens to be one of them. Next question, what will be your main message against the incumbent, Eric Paulson? My main message is, sir, you've been a politician for almost 30 years. I don't think elected office is something that should be a lifelong career. I believe it is the role of a U.S. representative in the United States Congress to show courage. I don't believe Eric Paulson is showing the courage that I certainly, as a resident of the 3rd District, believe he should be, especially right now. I believe the foremost responsibility of representation is simply showing up, hosting, being in front of groups like this where you don't know who's in it, you don't care who's in it, because everybody matters. I think that a representative should host meetings, I don't care what you call them, town hall meetings, public gatherings, forums, something in the public where people can simply look at you in the eye and ask you a question. I think that is a reason. Private sector. I've spent my life in the private sector. He spent his life in the public sector. I think it's time to switch. I'd like to give him a little chance to do some work like around here, right? And let me go do a little work that way. Right, with the real people. And I'm very sincere. I don't think he's a bad person or an evil, horrible man. I don't. I think he's been corrupted by a system that happens to do this to members of both parties. And after 5 terms, he's had plenty of chance to lead for a district that I think demands and deserves it. And I think it's time for a change. I would like to be that one who you send there to do that on your behalf. I think I'll do a fine job by you. And I see great opportunities to do what he hasn't done, which is to improve the tenor and collegiality in the system of governance that we honor, that he speaks about in his brand that he likes to present as a moderate, which I believe is misrepresented. And I think it's time for a change. Yeah.
Why do you think he keeps winning?
Why do I think he keeps winning?
Yeah.
Well, I think Eric Paulson does a very fine job of articulating a moderate image. That's why I think he keeps winning. This is a district that is a very moderate district, as I think most would agree. And I think there's a disconnect. I think there's a disconnect between what he presents using the millions of dollars of support that he generates, which is easy. When you can spend millions of dollars every 2 years on ads, you can project an image of moderation, but the voting record does not match that. The voting record does not match that. And ultimately, it's up to their district to make that decision. So my job is to simply expose the truth, the voting record, and give you an option and an alternative with a little bit of a different vision. You know, it is not my interest in playing nasty. I'm disgusted with the tone of politics. I don't think Eric Paulson is a terrible person. I do think it's time for a change. And I think he's won with the extraordinary help and investment of tens of millions of dollars from special interests that have a vested interest in keeping someone like him, who will vote their way, because he's asked, time and time and time again. And I think that's a big problem. And I think that's why he keeps winning. And by the way, that's why most incumbents keep winning. The system is, unfortunately, because of money, is really, really favorable to the incumbents. And that is why. And I think our government, I think our democracy requires new changes in leadership and ideas, and that's what makes America so extraordinary. We're not a static society, and nor should Congress. Would I support electoral reform, such as ranked choice voting or eliminating the Electoral College? This question comes up a lot, and I will tell you that I honor the Constitution, and I very much honor tradition and history. I think it has served this country extraordinarily well. And it's easy for, again, if most of us are Democrats here, it's very easy right now to be so frustrated and think, you know what, this is the second time in recent years where someone won the popular vote but didn't win the presidency, and it happened to be our person, and therefore we should change the rules. You know, I understand that, but the system, with great delicacy and care, was designed to afford a little bit more to the states that otherwise would be disenfranchised. And I think the Electoral College is really important to maintain, at least before we make decisions like this, to really, really give great care and consideration to the unanticipated consequences of making changes like that to a system that really has, I think, served this country very, very well. And let me tell you this. The issue in the last election was not the Electoral College. The issue was that 45% of eligible voters in the United States of America chose not to show up and vote. So anybody who tells me that we got to change the system, no. We should make it a responsibility to vote. That, my friends, is how the system should change. Let's not change the system to reward those who don't participate. Let's encourage participation to reward the system that has served the country so very well for so many years. So I'm not saying that it's not frustrating, and I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I don't think that we should make changes like that easily. And I will do a tag along to this. Many have asked me about impeachment, and I look at it the very same way. Once a democracy begins calls for impeachment short of absolute criminal, without factual criminal violations, once we start calling for that, we've reached the end of the game. Every single successive president of any party will always be facing the same thing. Nobody will be able to lead this country, and it is a very slippery slope. So I just ask all of you, when we consider these questions, take a step back, recognize how well we've been served through great times and terrible times by this extraordinary system, and let it take care of itself. But it takes good people. It takes good people in Congress to ensure that things are well maintained, because as I tweeted today, the legislative branch isn't equal to the executive branch. And if we're really that concerned about Donald Trump, as I tweeted today, leadership of both parties should be representing themselves at the gates of the White House to register their perspective on his performance or his character or his leadership. They are the equal. So that's how I look at these subjects, and I respect those who thoughtfully disagree, but those are my very important thoughts. Thank you. How will I support gay rights? Very simply, gay rights are human rights. I look at every single human being the exact same way. I celebrate differences in color and religion and background and sexual orientation, but everybody is a human being. Every single body is a human being. Civil rights are civil rights. To me, it is unequivocal. It is absolute, and it is a responsibility to protect everybody. I have been the beneficiary of these protections. It is my responsibility to do it for everybody else, simply. Stacy's got a question.
I have one that I didn't write down.
So if you are elected, what committees are you looking to join? Like, what kind of leadership are you looking to bring to Congress?
So, what would I like to bring to Congress? Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to start by telling you this, and I've said it time and time again. I'm disappointed in both parties. I really am. I'm a proud Democrat, but I'm disappointed in both parties. I expect more from both. And I'm not afraid to say that. And the way the game works right now is that if you're so fortunate to be elected, whether you're Republican or Democrat, leadership in your party will assign your committees and your offices and all these things. So, of course, there's an incentive to abide by your party's expectations, right? Because then you get the plum committee assignments and you get the nice office, and then there's a quid pro quo. If you vote along with us and you do what we ask you to do, we'll spend a lot of money on your race and we'll give you the nice committees, right? I'm not one of those people, and I'll tell you that right now. I'm not necessarily going to get the plum committee assignments when I go to Washington because I have higher expectations of leadership in both parties. And I will call that out. I'm an independent-minded Democrat. With that said, my experience in business, I think, would make me well-suited for any subject relative to small business. I opened a coffee shop last year, just opened a second one not too far away in Linden Hills called Penny's. We're paying $15 an hour minimum wages, $20. Almost every one of our employees is making over $20 an hour. Which is well over double what our competitors pay. And I'll tell you, small business is hard. There's an inverse correlation between the size of your business and the challenges you face. It can be joyful, but it's awfully hard. And I can empathize and have great compassion for those who risk their money and their time, their family and friends in the building of a small business. And I'd like to represent those interests because as a Democrat, I do believe the answers to a lot of our social problems are in the formation of businesses and affording people with dreams, entrepreneurs who want to do it themselves, the opportunity. So I want to help in that. Veterans affairs are important to me. I'm very saddened by a country that always finds the money to build a bigger war machine. And boy, we need a strong national defense. But somehow, the dollars are not there when our soldiers come home and they need to be cared for. Physically, emotionally, training, reacclimation. The way we abandon veterans, in my estimation, is shameful and wrong, and I'd like to play a role in that for many of those reasons, personal, but I think it's something that a bigger and more bright light should be shined on some of those issues and how we care for those who serve our country. So those are the two areas that I would love to focus my time and energies on, but where you are assigned has a lot to do with how abiding you are, and time will tell how that goes for you. How about other questions from the audience? Yeah. Okay. Dean, thank you for running in District 3. Well, thank you. I wrote this one. How do you plan on reaching out to disenfranchised Republicans? Dems are voting Dems, but we need more votes. Yeah. So I'm glad. Thank you for this question, whoever wrote it. If you look at my website, thank you. If you look at my website, you look at my Beam machine, my 1960 truck, I don't have a label. And that's by design. I want you to get to know me for who I am, where I came from, what I've done, what I stand for, my principles and values. I don't want you to look at me just because I've got a D behind my name. No more than I want you to look at any other candidate, Eric Paulson or others, just who has an R after the name. We should vote for candidates over parties. This is a district that happens to do that. And I'll tell you forthright, I've had more proactive communication from Republicans in the 3rd District to have coffee with me. In fact, I just came from a meeting with probably one of the most foremost recognizable conservatives in the Twin Cities who feels terribly disenfranchised right now. The good news is I bridged some of these gaps. My democratic principles are actually thoughtfully aligned with moderate Republican principles in areas like enterprise and free trade, even thoughtful tax policy. So I'm extending invitations to Republicans. It's working very well. If you look at even my donors, you'll see a lot of Eric Paulson's top donors have suddenly been investing in my campaign, right? So that's a good thing. But to answer your question, fundamentally, it's extending invitations to people to have a conversation. I love doing that. Even if you're not going to agree with me on everything, even if you're not going to support me or vote for me, I love having a conversation with you. And those are the ones that I learn the most from. As my great-grandfather used to say, if you have two people that agree all the time, you only need one, right? And that's kind of how I look at things. I love learning from those who bring something new to the table. That's what this campaign's all about. I'd like to be that one of those voices in Washington that starts this way, and if successful, might encourage others to start presenting their campaign faces the same way, which is an invitation to those of all parties and backgrounds to have a conversation and get some things done.
So I'm just going to grab one here, and then we'll pick up the following one. So what are your thoughts or your position on police brutality?
What are my thoughts and position on police brutality? I've been deeply saddened by the events in this community, our community, in just the last couple of years, and you know the ones I'm talking about, including the most recent one, Justine Damon. Each one of those is abhorrent and troublesome and clearly indicates that we have a problem. But I'm not going to tell you that the problem is comprehensively just the police. You know, there are bad apples in every profession I've ever encountered in my life. It certainly indicates that we need to assess how we train our police departments, how we recruit, and how we hold them accountable. But I am one who recognizes we do have a problem, and when I hear communities tell me that they look at the police in a way that's like an occupation force instead of people that are there to protect them, that I cringe. Because I'm friendly with a lot of police officers in the 3rd District and in the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul and the environs. And my goodness, my friends, you know, these are good people. The Bike Cops for Kids is an example. Officer Mike Kirchen and Mark Luco, two of the finest police officers you've ever met in your life, that recognize in North Minneapolis you can't sit in your car all day long and make enemies, especially of the young people in the community. You got to get out of your cars and get on a bike and give kids helmets and become their friends and become their mentors and be community police officers. There are good cops out there, and they'll be the first to tell you that this brings them shame. So